Hello and welcome back to the Advancing Healthcare Innovation Show. I'm your host, Michael Stamatinos. And if you're new to us, super pumped to have you here because we're having some just incredible conversations with real leaders that are painstakingly shaping and rechanging the future of healthcare. And we're just very passionate, very focused on healthcare innovation, adoption, access to care, and leadership. And if it's your first time tuning in, let me just kind of give you a little bit of a backdrop in terms of what we're trying to accomplish here. So we're focused on bringing stories of innovation within our space to life. And what does that look like? It's about highlighting real people that are on the front lines, making stuff happen day in and day out, and giving them the opportunity to share their stories, not just the wins, also some of the learnings with our community and with the world. And we've just got an incredible action-packed year with just amazing speakers. If you haven't had an opportunity to check out any of the historical ones, go ahead and do that. For any of the new interviews that come out, please hit the subscribe button now, and that will come directly into your inbox. So our field, it's constantly evolving, it's constantly changing, and it's crucial to have leaders who can envision the future and eagerly embrace innovation to address many of these pressing challenges. And our next guest on the show is one of these leaders. Today, we're very fortunate to have a true innovator, Amy Zolotow. Amy is the Director of Operations at Mercy Personal Physicians at Lutherville. Her journey has been marked just by her relentless pursuit of excellence. So excellent for the sake of being excellent in everything that she does, whether it's leading cross-functional teams, or diving deep into data to unearth actionable insights. She's got an unshakable spirit, a ton of grit, and a keen eye for, I'll just call it strategic ecosystem development. She feeds the ecosystem. She's committed to enhancing patient and employee experiences through human-centered approaches, and her work's been instrumental in bridging the gap between complex healthcare environments and technology adoption. And she's been able to demonstrate this just by having a unique ability to foster community building and a shared understanding from the bedside, even up into the boardroom. So her ambition around solving longstanding challenges it's been really influential. It's been very inspiring to see. She's very, very caring about healthcare delivery, access, and outcomes. And she's a sought-after voice in our industry. She's graced numerous stages, including TEDx. And she's also been featured on AI Med, HIMSS, and Reuters Digital Health, among many others. So we're graced to have her here, share a bunch of her stories, share wins, share learnings. So Amy, it's great to see you. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Michael. I'm so excited to be here today.
Yeah, so let's dig in a little bit to your past, because we want to talk about the future. Sometimes you have to look backward. So give us a thumbnail sketch of who is Amy? Why do you care about healthcare innovation so much?
Well, if I really want to take a step back, my interest in healthcare technology really stemmed from the passing of my father. He died of pancreatic cancer and was diagnosed only 4 weeks before he died. And wow. I remember sitting in that room next to him, and he was on a ventilator, and I'm looking around this room and I'm seeing all of this technology. Here are the tools, here's the tech, here are all of these gadgets and gizmos that are supposed to keep him alive, and they're not working. So I really had a sense of, or preliminary sense of, the things that were broken at that time. And I was only 16, so I was just starting to kind of wrap my head around what was happening. But I was really fixated on the broken. And I think that's kind of been the golden thread throughout my career, is just focusing on how to fix that broken. And I took that curiosity, that interest in the brokenness in healthcare, and it followed me into my graduate studies, where I studied, I received a master's of social science with an emphasis on health and communication, really looking at the brokenness in the continuity of care process and the gaps in communication that we see. and how destructive those gaps can be.
Right.
So from there, I moved into my role at Hopkins, where I held a variety of roles in international and the domestic side. And then I find myself here today where I am now the director of Mercy Personal Physicians. And, throughout the trajectory in the last 10 plus years, I look back and I see a lot of broken, but the broken is increasing and it's taken on a lot of different shapes and sizes. And this is where technology comes into play and where we really have this fantastic opportunity right now to make a difference with the tools we have available.
I was, as you were kind of going through that, you mentioned about your dad. Sorry to hear about your dad. But sometimes when you kind of go through some brokenness, it's a catapult for something greater. And it sounds like you want to really use that experience to elevate other areas. When you mentioned about a lot of brokenness and seeing brokenness increase, how do you prioritize what you want to fix? How do you and your team take a look at some of the issues that are happening, and how do you triage those? What does that look like in either in your day-to-day or at whatever level like that you want to kind of speak to? Talk a little bit about that.
That's a really good question. I think when I think of my role in operations, I speak a lot of different languages. And I say that just given the breadth of my exposure to everyone from the boardroom to the front desk staff to my phlebotomist to my providers. So pain is everywhere, but everyone, you have to speak to everyone in a way that's it's attuned to their language.
Mm.
So I know when I put my CEO hat on, I just need to keep my system alive. That's at the end of the day, that's what I'm looking at. Where my providers might be just upset because they can't fit another patient in their schedule. They don't know how they're supposed to finish their day without taking work home. We talk a lot pajama time in this space. Really, when you're talking about prioritization, it really comes back to the people and putting yourself in their shoes and trying to figure out, okay, what's their priority? When people talk about, what is it you do? You're in operations. What does that look like? The best answer that I've ever been given by one of my staff is that I'm a ninja. So you're in the background and you're making things happen. You're allowing people to shine and you're fixing the broken on the back end. So, and you're trying to do that, relatively quickly or as fast as you can. And I think it's a matter in that respect. You do things quietly, you try to help where you can, and your ability to prioritize really comes back to the person that you're interacting with and what you need to do to meet their needs.
What does that dynamic look like? I mean, how big of a team are we talking about here? And how do you view innovation influence? Is that within the same sentence, same paragraph? Are we talking about two totally different things? What's your viewpoint on that?
So tell me a little bit more, like when you're asking, like, what does that look like?
Like when you want to try to get stuff done, innovation's about not just potential. To me, it's around kinetic. It's about things that are moving in such complex environments that you operate in. Oftentimes there's a lot of blockers and you kind of have to maneuver around those blockers. How do you get ideas that aren't traditionally being used to gain momentum?
Well, I'll start by saying technology always starts with the people. Always starts with the people. So when we're talking about, for example, I can give an example. So when COVID hit, I started my job, and it was one of the most interesting times to start a new job. And I had a C-suite coming by my office saying, "We are so happy to have you here. Welcome. You started at the worst time." And I heard this over and over and over again. And I got to a point where I had to stop them and say, no, I didn't start at the worst time. I started at the best time. I mean, nobody wanted COVID to happen. Here we have this opportunity, though, to connect with our people, where, you know, it might have taken months and months and months to really get to know a staff of 200 plus. I mean, we're in a pressure cooker situation. I mean, I got to learn, we're going through this entire pandemic together. And so you had the environment to fuel those connections, but you got a chance to really understand how people would tick, you know, who I could rely on for what, who is savvy and what. So when COVID hit, we were tasked to put telemedicine services in place very, very quickly. So here we have providers who were not they were not accustomed to this kind of technology. And this is where it went back to, how do I, knowing my people, understanding them in a very short period of time. Again, I'm just starting a job, understanding what's most important to them, and then also understanding what's most important strategically to the organization, what's most important to our patients to deliver healthcare safely, and being able to marry all of those things together during that time. But again, the common thread is people, understanding what people needed, how to also motivate people and have them understand, you know, even people that were a little hesitant, providers that were a little hesitant about going through the channels and, you know, taking all the necessary steps to learn and adopt this technology, really getting them to buy into that. And it's not as easy as you think, particularly with those who might be a little bit more tech resistant. But again, going back to the people part, that's where, and that's why I say all the time, when we talk about this big word innovation, what does that really look like? It's a matter of really building to understand. But you're not just building to understand the technology or this new and shiny something.
Right.
It's really going back to understanding the people, because that's where you can really make a difference. That's where you really start to see momentum grow.
And you feel like at that point in time, there were some external forces that were sort of nudging this innovation to happen along as things started to kind of calm down a bit. Have you found, or what have you found to sort of equal that level of external force to continue this type of innovation, this type of transformation to happen? Have you been able to, I guess, find that external source or create an external source to keep things moving along? Like, what have you found to nudge this along?
I think a couple things. One is education. Encouraging education across the board. You want to ensure that people are staying up to date, and it can be incredibly challenging, right? We have this EHR system, not many are fans of, because you've got 140 data points you have to fill out, and you've got updates, you know, every week or so. And it's a lot of information on top of the increasing patient demands, increasing, you know, productivity demands. There's a lot that's being thrown at our providers. I'll use our providers, our clinicians, as an example. So really it comes back to what we need to do to empower our people. And I can think of no better way as to empower our people, whether it's the clinician or front desk staff, than through education. You know, we're hearing a lot right now in this space, and in my, you know, in my experience going to and speaking at conferences, I'm learning the importance, and I'm seeing the importance of upskilling, really taking the time that we don't have in healthcare to begin with, to really help empower our people through education, and also to help them.
Well, when does that happen? When does the education happen? Talk about that, because you mentioned upskilling and creating those opportunities for people to get better. And then you also mentioned that there really isn't a lot of time. When can the upskilling happen? Does it happen like on the clock, or does it happen off the clock?
I think both, in the ideal world.
Okay.
I know it's not, we don't live in an ideal world.
Right, of course.
But I do think, and this is a shift that you're starting to happen, you know, throughout my experience, it's we have, you get these designated HR trainings that you have to
Hmm.
take, right? I predict we're going to start to see a shift and an increase in the kinds of education, particularly as we gain more exposure to different kinds of technology, whether it's AI or something else. But this is it becomes a bigger discussion with senior leadership as to what are the areas that we really need to focus on to move the needle. We're also talking in context of a labor shortage that we all are collectively feeling. And so where are we supposed to find the time when we don't have enough people and we want to educate them? But this is why stress, innovation, technology, getting the tools to alleviate the burden, because people are leaving. They're burned out. And when we're
Yeah.
talking about burnout, we're talking about burden. So, what are the areas that we can start investing in that will really make a difference? And that includes tools like AI, where we can, and we're starting to see a shift, right?
Hmm.
The AMA, there's a recent AMA report that it did a nice overview of the landscape right now and physician sentiment, healthcare system sentiment. So we're seeing a lot more movement in large academic medical centers that have, a lot more funding, research, and so forth. Smaller physician practices are starting to trail behind. But I will tell you, as part of that report, you are seeing a shift. And I think about 14% of health systems right now have an AI plan in place, an AI, you want to say it's a plans to implement AI
Right.
technologies. You're going to see this increasing in the next 12 months, where we'll be up to 94% of leadership as part of healthcare leadership is collectively deciding, hey, this is what we need to invest in and this is why. We can't educate a population that is already out the door because they're so burned out. But it really, so I think, I don't know if this is like a chicken and egg, like what comes first.
Right.
I do know when you empower people with education and ways to do their job that makes it easier for them, they get more invested. Like that's really what we're looking at, is how do we create an environment for our people that allows them to invest in their jobs. And it's very challenging, and it starts with culture, creating community, keeping that open channel of communication, and really understanding the people,
Right.
why they're there. I mean, actually, and it's hard to do, especially with large groups of people, but that's really where we need to start, breaking through all of the silos, all of the ladders, like really getting a chance to have people on, our senior leaders on the ground, really understanding what the pain points are, breaking through that disconnect. And that's where you really start to see change happen.
And then, you've got the larger, broader culture, and then you've got subcultures at different sites. Is there a common thread when you walk in to a clinic, to a site, and you see just a rockin' culture? What is that X factor that makes one clinical site really fabulous place to come to work to, despite all these challenges that you've listed? And then one where you could just energetically feel as you walk in, you're like, oof, this place is a little heavier. What's made all the difference? Is it
Mm.
local leadership? Like, what is it? I'm just very curious.
I feel like there's an energy when you walk into a site. I have people that come into my practice and they're like, it feels different here. I don't know what it is, and it's hard to put words to. And it makes me so happy. I love hearing that. And I'm not saying like this is actual, like people actually say
Yeah.
this about my site. When you see people laughing in the hall, when people actually talk about their days, when they stop by and they engage what they did over the weekend, and it comes from this authentic place, patients feel that. When you have providers walking their patients down the hall with their arm over their patient, asking about their family, giving them flowers from their backyard, like again, like it creates this sense of community, and you feel it. I don't know if I can pick just one thing, but I
Yeah,
think it's a collective kind of movement. We have, I call them hallway talks. Um, and it happens all the time. I think so often we get caught up in our problems and what we're facing, in the exam room. And by we, I mean, our providers,
right.
for the most part. And it's a very special moment where I'll catch a provider in the hallway, and then organically we just start talking through what the problem is, and usually it's framed in a story, right? Because that's how we talk in healthcare. It's all story. Story is what really drives change and creates meaning for people. So, kind of going back to that sense of like what creates a culture, that sense of community. When I can walk down the hallway and talk through an issue with one of my providers and then pull in someone else, I see, I'm like, what do you think of this? All of a sudden we have this like really organic conversation where we're like curing cancer, like we're on our way.
Well,
It's really
give us an
powerful.
example of hallway talk at its best, right? Because you could see it go the other direction, gossiping, all this other chatter, but like give us a
Oh
positive
yeah.
hallway talk that someone can feel really excited. Like it doesn't have to be anything just groundbreaking, but just give me an example.
Oh yeah, I think I can think back to one example. It can be a really challenging space when you have a provider who retires and then you have
Mm,
someone come in to take their place. And what does that change look like? What does that change look like for patients? And I remember an example where I was speaking with one of my providers in the hallway about some of the concerns he had. Patient expectations. How do I navigate their expectations? What's the right way of doing this? I mean, this is a real problem, and I don't think there's a true these are the set of instructions you need to have a successful transition. I think there might be some
right.
components that we can all relate to and that may prove to be successful. But again, it goes back to the people, it goes back to the person, their style of practice. So we were talking through some of his concerns and some of the things that patients were expecting. And then I remember I had another provider down the hall and I started waving my hand and pull them in, and like people have gotten used to this with me.
Yeah. You're like, hey,
And
hey,
yeah, and even bringing in some of the medical assistants at the time. I mean, we had a group, and obviously this is not an earshot of patients at all,
yeah.
right?
Right.
But I mean, again, it's like the same thought, when you're in the shower. And for me, it's the gym. Like, I think I've got the best idea for something when I'm like on the elliptical. I'm like, oh my God, this is amazing. Or some people feel like that in the shower. But the hallway talks, you're catching people when they're not expecting it.
Mhm.
And your capacity to really kind of be authentic like expands exponentially. Like,
Yeah.
you can talk to people. It's like the boardroom. Everyone's like really just
It's really tight. It's
stone.
constrictive. That
Yeah, yeah.
to
And
me, what
then
you're describing is like you're doing a real-time jam session right there. It's like, hey, who cares what it sounds like? We're just jamming out right now.
exactly. And then you can take those conversations, and because obviously time is limited when you're in the hallway, but you can take those conversations, pause and then reconvene at another time, or like create more space at a later time to really talk through what those issues look like. And it creates an opportunity for people to really just share what they're facing without fear of judgment. And I guess tying that back to your original question, how do you have the practices that have this culture, they have this feeling, this wow effect, I really want to be here. All of that contributes to that feeling.
Mm.
And again, it always comes back to the people. A community, I say this, it's like my catchphrase by now. Community is everything. It's everything. You can
You
feel
know,
it.
you're pretty active on the circuit. You're out. Everything's 80/20. You know where your 80% of your time is going. And yet um, you've been very diligent on where you spend your time in that 20%. And you've been, attending conferences and you've been listening. Two questions. One is, who impresses you right now? who is really impressing you? And the second part of that question is there's so much information at conferences. What's your secret on actually implementing what you hear and what you listen to? So who impresses you, and what's your secret in relation to implementation and execution?
I love these questions. These are very good questions. I would say for who impresses me, I'm a sucker for the underdog. I'm a sucker for the person that is sitting in the back row, and I'll deliberately sit back there with them and start talking with them. Maybe the person that is writing things down or has a look on their face, and getting them to open up. So they might not be the chief digital officer of a renowned institution. They might not be, have a lot of letters after their name. But I love the person who is filled with passion. They want to execute on ideas. They're the person wanting to build community. They're the people that truly inspire me, and they want to make a difference. And they're not just talking, but they're doing.
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
some of our most special people in this space are the ones that might not be as vocal. I love talking at conferences. I'm in a really unique space because I'm in operations. I'm a director of operations. The stereotypical person on the circuits are normally C-suite, and they're in the digital space. I touch everything. So I listen and I can understand and nod my head because I see everything and I can speak to everything. What makes me kind of tilt my head or raise my eyebrow are the people who might be quiet, but they're doing the work. And they might not have the accolades, but when you start to talk with them and you see the passion, the fact that they want to, bottom line, help people, you hear those words come out of their mouth. Like, it's not, they're there not for any other reason, but to learn, absorb, take that information and do something with it. All in the effort of wanting to help people. Those are the people that impress me.
So talk about how you take large sums of information, because when you go to a conference, it's like drinking from a fire hose. How do you deduce it down to a nugget, something, and then what do you decide to implement, and what does that look like in your world?
That's a good question. It makes me think of an article, or a study rather, that Oracle did last year. It was called The Decision Dilemma. And it was a massive study that was done over 14,000 people, 17 countries. And it really did a deep dive on what leaders, just leaders, business leaders in general, not just healthcare, how they thought about data in relation to the decisions that they make. And so when you're talking about, like, you're drinking from a fire hose, like, what do you do? I think we're in this world right now, this moment of time where we're so focused on data, but more data doesn't necessarily equate in anything better coming from it. It's a matter of what you do with it. And I think, especially given this study, I mean, it was staggering. I think it was 85% of the participants suffer from decision fatigue. They feel this disconnect of the data, given the a disconnect with the decisions being made, given the plethora of data that they're facing. So when you're thinking of, all of these issues, everything coming at you, that's all data. And it can be really challenging to make decisions, especially in healthcare, given everything that we're facing. I think, taking a step back, I always think of, when I walk in the door every day, I think of patients. At every decision I make, patients need to be at the forefront, bottom line. I obviously care very much about making sure that our culture is intact, because we can't do anything if we're not taking care of our people. We can't take care of our patients. So as I have patients at the forefront, I know that in order to take care of patients, we have to take care of our staff as well. So again, going back to that prioritization piece, really taking a look at all of the data elements that we're being faced with every day and ensuring that we can execute on the things we can, and also understand that there are some challenges that we might have to just continue speaking about, talking through. We're living in very challenging times right now in healthcare, very challenging. But it's just a matter of being able to take a step back and really identify the areas that we can control and the ones that we can't.
So I'm smiling because I didn't set this up. We didn't talk about this beforehand. So, but in this next segment, I want to shift gears for a second because you put something out online a little while ago, and I want to get your reaction to it. This is a post you put up on LinkedIn, and this is what it said. Not the whole thing, but a portion of it. We can learn a lot from Stoic philosophy, the most powerful being understanding what we have control over and what we do not, what we have influence over and what we do not. And the Greek Stoic philosopher, yes, I'm Greek, so I'm extra excited about this, Epictetus states, the chief task in life is simply this, to identify and separate matters so I can clearly say to myself, which are externals not under my control, and which have to do with the choices I actually control. Change management is, in capital letters, not simply a process, but a mindset and a practice that must be cultivated over time. Provide some additional color to that, insights, and like, how do you get those reps in to continuously, I'll just say, develop the muscle of something being cultivated over time? What does that look like?
Mm-hmm. I will start this by saying we need to talk offline about Stoicism. I love it. It fuels me. It is something I practice every day. I love Marcus Aurelius. His work is phenomenal. I think a lot of the work behind Stoicism is so simple, but yet so practical. But for this particular quote in relation to change management, oh my goodness, I mean, we're all hearing change management, change management. Change management is really, to quote myself, it is a mindset. And I think that can be really challenging for someone to think through. I think when we think change management, we think of a series of processes and tools in order to get us from A to Z. And it certainly can be that, but you have to have the flexibility, the adaptability, the mindset to say, okay, pause, let's look around. Is this working? Is this not working? What do we need to do to move forward? Really, it requires that you start with yourself and how you see yourself, how you see the world around you. And I think when you have that understanding, I think it really can help shape how you move things forward. I think when it comes to change management, obviously letting go of the current state is the most challenging part of change, especially in healthcare, where we just latch on to what we have so tightly, and it's very challenging to let go of that. But even from that sentiment, the letting go of current state, that's a mind shift. Like, it all starts with yourself and how you see things. And again, it goes back to connecting with the people around you who have to undergo the change and talking through what that looks like with them. There are going to be many times that we're not going to be able to control the outcome. I think healthcare, we're in this unique position where we deal with so much ambiguity and uncertainty every day. change freaks people out because they're like, I got to deal with more of that. You're asking me to do something else to add to all of that. It's mentally draining. But when it comes to the things that we can control our reaction to things. We can control how we look at a process or a change in place and think about, okay, so I know this is going to benefit me in XYZ way. This is what's important to me. Like, how do I figure out a way to learn, to grow, to adopt? And for each person, it's going to be, there's going to be something different involved in that process. But, again, change, it does come back to your mindset and how you see yourself and how you see the world around you.
Yeah. I'm even just thinking as you're explaining that, there's a lot of feeling and emotion that happens, throughout a clinic, especially with things happening with patients, and that type of feeling and emotion sometimes triggers other things. And I know people say it's not about what happens to you. What matters the most is how you respond to it. It's easier said than done. Do you disagree with that?
You're right. It's easier said than done. I mean, I think that when you have staff who are providers, for example, and you're saying, okay, so this patient that you're concerned about can't get in to see the specialist that you need them to for another 6 to 8 months. And they come to you and they're trying to figure out, well, okay, how do I get them through? What are the things that I need to think about? What are the tools I can use at my disposal? And you see these providers taking their work home, spending tons of time trying to research things to bridge that patient over, understanding that access is a continuous, it's a challenge that we are continuing to face today, given the shortage that we're facing. And so for me to say it's all about how you react to the situation, I mean, that kind of, that if I was the provider, I would say, okay, so you try to stay in my shoes. Why don't you, do you really understand how challenging this is? So I think there's a point where that's where I think the connection comes in, where you can sit with that person and save space for them and say, it's not just a matter of, you have control over your reaction. I know you're frustrated, but really allowing them that space to be frustrated and upset and work with them, see if there are resources you can provide that can help maybe move things faster for that patient. So I think there's a point. I mean, we obviously all know we can be reacting to any kind of change that's thrown our way in any way, shape, and form. We all saw this during COVID. For the day-to-day changes, the frustrations, the hurdles, the challenges, for me to say, well, it's all a matter of how you react, it comes across as insensitive. So I think we all need to kind of be mindful of like the situation right. when we're talking through that. But again, the way that you meet people where they're at is by saving space for them and sitting with them and giving them the time that neither of you have to help them, to at least reassure them that you're there, maybe come up with an action plan. Sometimes there's a venting involved where it's just like, I just need to get this off my chest and this is what I'm facing. And, my patient's so upset with me and I don't know how to make things better. Like sometimes just sitting with it is okay. Yeah.
So for operators that are out there that are trying to really innovate, that are trying to lead the front line and know this, and even for innovators that are trying to go from the outside in, what's like one action item that you can say, hey, from this conversation, you can take this and you can apply this. What is that one thing?
Understand what the problem is. I think oftentimes we are all presented with problems that seem like, oh, that's just an easy answer, or that's just a quick fix. And sometimes a light is broken and it just needs to get fixed. But oftentimes, we have problems that we're faced with that aren't really the problem. Sometimes the patient who is really angry on the phone and yelling and upset that they couldn't get this appointment exactly when they wanted, maybe it turns out that patient just lost their husband and they really need to get this appointment in because they have to attend this funeral and they know they're almost out of their medication. And it's by sitting with it and asking questions, like just taking the judgment out of it and connecting with that person to really understand what the root of the problem is. I think so much of the time we're talking about this technology space with this, we need to act now. And I am all about that. We need solutions in place now. We cannot afford to continue the route that we're going at the speed we're going. I'm completely in favor of moving. But if you don't pause to understand what the problem is you're trying to solve, all of that effort will be wasted. And that's why you have to make sure you're asking the right questions. Really take the time to do a deep dive. Is the problem really that problem? Or are there other factors that you really need to get to? Because maybe the solution it's not an innovative solution that you need. Maybe it's just a conversation, or maybe there's a non-technology element that you can include. So I think if I was to give advice, really understanding what the root cause of a problem is and starting from that point would be the best advice to give.
And last but not least, I mean, how can folks follow your work, follow some of the things that you and your team are doing? Just give a little commercial, give a little shout out to yourself.
I'm on LinkedIn. That's where you can find me.
Okay.
You can also find me at a variety of conferences and speaking events, podcasts. I do post everything on LinkedIn. It's my house of information. So you can find me in everything I'm doing there.
Awesome. So Amy, thank you so much for today. And for those if you've tuned in and you found this conversation particularly enlightening, I did. There's a lot of golden nuggets that you shared, both, I'll just say, surface level and subsurface level. Like, you went deep today. So thank you for providing that bit of granularity. And if you found it useful, please share it, mind commenting on it. All those things help things go a little bit farther ahead, especially when we're trying to make changes into our space. And that only happens when we can kind of collaborate, come together, and take action. So looking forward to our next conversation, Amy, and see you soon.
Sounds good. Thank you, Michael.